Welcome back to the Libertarian Solution. We want to welcome our guest, Dr. Walter Block, to the show. Dr. Block, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
How you doing this evening?
Hang in there.
You're here with Nick Coons, Richard Sutton, and Jimmy Annuzzo on the Libertarian Solution. And we wanted to talk to you today about privatizing the road system. And I've actually read some of what you've written. As I understand it, you're kind of a free market kind of guy, right?
Vaguely.
Vaguely. Now, what do people generally think of the first time they hear the idea of privatizing roads, and what kind of misconceptions do those words draw in people's mind?
Well, they think I'm on some controlled substance or that I'm a loony bin, and they dismiss it out of hand. And yet, the very first roads in this country were turnpike roads, private roads, where a company would set up a little road from A to B. They'd clear a path and put some wood down and clear out the mud and charge a fee. So people can't conceive of it nowadays, but that's the way roads started.
Well, one of the things that, as a libertarian, I definitely like the idea of privatizing roads, where each person who is going to use the road should be responsible for paying for that road, as opposed to, maybe the little old lady who doesn't even own a car, would pay in her taxes for roads or something like that. Doesn't really make sense. Well, one of the challenges, it seems, that we have such a mess with the road system today, where we have all sorts of government roads all across the country, and trying to convert those into private roads seems to be quite a challenge, versus if we started from scratch, where we just had all roads private, we'd have all sorts of efficiency in the system. I guess what methods will we use to try and convert the current system?
Well, that's a toughie. That's sort of like unscrambling the egg.
Right.
But this was the exact problem the Soviets faced when they try to privatize things, although I suppose roads are tougher than steel mills or farms. But still, it's always tough to privatize. But I think we're putting the cart before the horse. Before we can contemplate the actual situation or the actual process of de-socializing the roads, and that is turning them over to private hands, we have to deal with why should we do this in the first place, and what about the objections that you'd have to put in a half a penny every 3 seconds or something like that.
Okay, so what would be the reasons we'd want to privatize the road system as opposed to just leaving it as it is? I mean, people go on the road and they can drive from point A to point B, and, when certain times of the day they get stuck in traffic and things like that, but we've pretty much accepted all those things as normal. Why would we want to change any of that?
Well, one reason is congestion. In many cities, you just sort of sit there, and that's horrific. I mean, it's sort of a horrific waste of time and energy, and people get grumpy and they start shooting each other, and they say that in some cities the fastest way to get around town is on skates or a bicycle, not a car, which is pathetic. But I think even more important than that tremendous waste of time where people commute for an hour and a half a day is the fact that so many people die on the roads. 40,000 people a year die on the roads. And to put that in context, in all the years that we were in Vietnam, only 50,000 U.S. soldiers died. In Iraq, I don't know, it's many fewer. 9/11, it was only 3,000. Katrina, only about 1,500. And here it's 40,000 every year, year in and year out. So to me, that's a horrendous thing, even worse than the depression we're having. At least, no one's dying exactly, maybe, from the depression, but we're dying like flies on the road, and it's just horrific. I'll bet you there's, they say 6 degrees of separation, everyone in the world. Well, I'll bet you 1 or 2 degrees of separation, and everyone listening to this radio broadcast knows someone who knows somebody who got killed on the roads. So this is just a horrendous charnel house, but you're right, people sort of think, oh, well, death and taxes, that's the way the cookie crumbles, whatever. Well,
now, with 40,000 deaths a year on the roadways in a country of 300 million, I mean, isn't that kind of to be expected? Aren't cars dangerous? Is there really anything that can be done about that?
Well, yeah, I think there is something to be done about that. My estimate in my book that's coming out is that if we privatize the roads, we'd maybe have 10,000 deaths instead of 40, and we'd save 30,000 people. You see, the problem is we have no competition between road owners because there's one owner of the road, namely the goddamn government. And when someone gets smacked up on the highway, nobody loses money. That is, who's in a position to stop it. Whereas if we had competition between Road A and Road B, and Road A was dangerous and Road B was safe, well, the Road B people would make sure everyone knew about that and might even be able to charge more money and make a vast profit and maybe be able to buy out Road A and thus make it safer. See, that's the way it works in every other area of the free enterprise system when you don't have government regulatory agencies involved. I mean, the reason there's no pizza or shoelace problem is we have competition. Those entrepreneurs who don't satisfy customers go broke. We don't have that in roads.
Professor Block, isn't there a natural interest that the government has, though, in roads? It's almost special. It's interstate commerce. It's the way the government gets involved in, the free marketplace, and to give up that power to let it go to a private company or a couple of private companies competing seems to be a very far stretch. The government would maybe say, well, maybe a public-private partnership, but truly private roads seems like there's just too much interest that the government has in commerce and in controlling the flow of commerce.
Well, they'll even assert that it's national security itself.
Well, public-private partnerships is just another name for fascism. That was the fascist system, so I'm not much of a fan of that. But take other long, thin things like railroads. True, we were one of the only countries to have private railroads. Nowadays we don't have much of that. But we did have private railways, and those are long, thin things, replete with commerce. So, if the government has an interest in roads, highways, they have an interest in railroads. Or adversely, since they don't have any proper interest, at least from the libertarian point of view, in railroads, well, then they don't have any in highways either.
What's interesting out here in Phoenix, in Arizona, actually, not just in Phoenix, but a lot of states are running budget deficits, and it's kind of interesting. States that spend the most have the biggest deficit, obviously, and then the states that don't have income taxes typically have the lowest percentage deficit, or not. Some of them have surpluses, but Arizona's running a pretty serious deficit, and they're using the road system to help shore up that deficit. And they've installed hundreds, I think, Nick, right? Hundreds of photo radar cameras around on the roads that don't actually give you any points on your license when you get a ticket. They just send you a fine in the mail that you're supposed to pay. So that was my point. The roads are really a moneymaker for the government, seems like.
Well, that's a great reason for not letting them have the roads, because the last thing we want is the government to have more money. God forbid. They've got way too much. I mean, during the serfdom days, I think the master only took 2/7 of the workers' day, or the workers' week, rather. Here they take 45% of our sustenance. And the idea of giving them more, I mean, some people favor the legalization of drugs on the grounds that now the government could tax it and get more revenue. Well, to me, that's a great reason for not legalizing drugs, although obviously I favor legalizing drugs as a libertarian. But just because the government gets less money is not a bad thing, and if the government gets more money, that seems to be a bad thing from a libertarian point of view, because the government... Well, for the anarcho-libertarian, the only good government is zero government. But even for the limited government libertarian, government is like a fire. If it stays in the fireplace, all well and good. But if it gets around in the rest of the house, that's not so good. Well, what is the fireplace? Well, traditionally, the Ayn Rand view, at least of minarchism or minimal government, is armies, courts, and police. Not roads, not highways, not streets, not... railroads, none of that stuff. So I don't think there's a libertarian case for government roads, certainly not on the grounds that they have to be involved in commerce. Who says? Constitution? The hell with the Constitution. There's a higher value than the Constitution. That's libertarian theory or the libertarian law. But it seems to me horrendous and horrific that so many people get killed. And if we had just a little bit of competition, if road owners could compete with each other to reduce the deaths, that would save thousands of precious lives. Let me give you, for instance, right now the minimum speed on the highway is 40 miles an hour, and usually the maximum speed in the big highways is 70 in most states, which means most people do 75. And you get these little old lady types in the left lane doing 60 miles an hour, sort of screwing up traffic, and that creates impatience. And why shouldn't we have an experiment say that in the left lane you can do 80, in the middle lane 65, and in the right lane 50, and everyone has to do exactly that? Now, would that save lives? I don't know. But I do know that if they tried something like that, or if some entrepreneur tried that and he had great success, well, that might lead to other entrepreneurs emulating him, and we could have fewer deaths all around the country. Isn't that something that's good?
You're suggesting experimenting.
Yeah, different people would have different experiments, just like, you know, at one time Henry Ford said they can have any color they want as long as it's black. And then I think it was General Motors said, well, you know, if you want green or red or blue, we'll give you those colors in cars too. Imagine if, you know, the government owned all cars and said you can only have a black car. That's silly, but why shouldn't we extrapolate from that and allow different road owners to have different rules of the road and let them compete to see how many, who can reduce the death rate by the most.
Well, I read an amusing story once that discusses privatizing the roads in a future libertarian society that's quite global and extreme, and this comical character is lamenting how he's driving along the highway and he missed his exit, so he's going to have to spend another $3 before he can get off the highway, which is nice and safe and fast, when he could have spent, a nickel a mile on the surface streets.
Well, before we went to break, we asked, we said we wanted to talk a little bit about what a private road system would look like, and if you could kind of give us some thoughts on that. I guess basically, some of the fears that people have would be that, as soon as they leave their house, they would have to deposit money into some toll booth or something, and every block they'd be depositing more money into a toll booth, and if they didn't have any money, it'd be illegal for them to leave their house because they'd have to enter a roadway somehow and be trespassing if they didn't pay for it. So, the way neighborhoods are set up, there's basically one road that winds through various neighborhoods, one road that goes by each person's house, and if the government were to, say, auction those off to a private road owner,
neighborhood associations,
then we'd end up having monopolies, and that road owner could effectively charge whatever they wanted or just be jerks and not let certain people pass. What kind of ways do you see a private road system operating, and what kind of methods do you think would be used in transition to prevent those sorts of things from happening?
Well, had we started de novo with private roads and I set up a road, the last thing I want is for people not to come and build houses on the side of the road. Namely, I want them to do that. I want farms and factories and houses on my road so I can charge more. And in order to get them to come, I have to contractually obligate myself, as you say, not to act like a jerk. So I have to sign a contract saying that I won't do that.
Okay.
Now, one way to privatize it is, let's say there's a housing development of 100 houses with, 10 little streets in there, and then one arterial street leading out into the main highway. Well, as someone just said, I forget who it was, but right on this show, it could be that the neighborhood association, the one that owns the swimming pool and the whatever else, the golf course in there, gets to own all the roads, and it makes rules by majority vote of the homeowners, and such a group is not going to act in a precipitous way, because if they did, the value of the housing would be zero if you couldn't get out of it or into it, and no one would want that. But the key is that if you look at it de novo, the road owner wants you to come there, and in order to entice you to come there, he has to, as I said, contractually obligate himself not to do this.
So when you're talking about a homeowners association, this is different from a local government, because a homeowners association is something that someone volunteers to be a part of when they purchase property. They have a deed restriction on their house, so it doesn't work like a government, right?
Right. There's no government involved. Now let's suppose we have Elm Street, which is not part of a condo association or anything like that. Well, let's say there are 3,000 houses on Elm Street, and it's 2 miles long or whatever the numbers are. Well, one way to do it is to set up the Elm Street Corporation and give each homeowner a share in proportion to his frontage on the house or the value of the frontage or whatever. And now the Elm Street Road Association owns that road. And obviously they're going to let people in and out of Elm Street, otherwise, be silly to have Elm Street if they wouldn't let people in and out, and they're the owners of it. And then they could make a deal with Broadway, which is the next block over, or the cross street, or what have you, a similar kind of a thing. So I don't see that there'd be any insuperable barriers, and certainly the way Elm Street is going to work is you're not going to have every little old lady or every house owner has got a little box in front of their house, and you have to put a penny in there. Rather, what you would do is put, those universal product codes that are on everything, like Kansas soda and whatever. You put them on all the underbodies of cars, and you put some sort of thing on the road similar to the checkout counter at the supermarket, where when you slide the product code over, it goes boop, right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the month, you get a bill for where you've been, because they can tell where you've been based on which cross streets you've crossed.
Oh, that's a little spooky too, but
well, it's a little spooky because of the privacy thing. If you want to visit your proctologist or your your girlfriend when you're married and you shouldn't be visiting her. There are ways around that too. In my book I discuss some of the ways. You can just pay a fixed fee for road use in the whole city or whatever it is.
Yeah. Or I guess you could do like
cities that have such passes now in the United States.
You could do like a prepaid system too, kind of like you can get a prepaid cell phone where you buy the phone and the month of service for $50 or $100, and
right.
Nobody assigns it to you because it's cash. You could buy a UPC code that you stick on the bottom of your car that's good for however much, and you've prepaid it, so nobody cares what your identity is, that sort of thing. So,
and also it could be billed based on whether you're in rush hour or not. In other words, if you're traveling at 3 in the morning, you pay a much lower rate than if you're traveling at 5 in the afternoon, or going out from the city, and that would deal with the problem of congestion. We'd have peak load pricing. You charge more during the rush hour to sort of flatten out the things so you don't have these horrific things. And that's a way of encouraging people to do carpools. Whereas right now what they do is they have this thing, if you have 2 people or more in the car, you can go on the express lane.
Yeah, those don't work.
No, they certainly don't work. And what they ought to be doing is using the price system like we do for everything else. Look, if you want a great seat in the opera, you pay more, right? Or if you want to sit behind first base or whatever it is, 50-yard line, you pay more.
Yeah.
It's not based on how many people you bring in. It's based on how much money you pay. Well, if you're very rich and you're by yourself and you want to go fast, then you ought to be able to. I predict that the private roads would make allowances for that.
Dr. Block, one of the things that we discussed during the break is that technology generally helps us in the long term. So, for instance, when Ma Bell was the only game in town, you pretty much paid whatever they wanted to charge you for a phone. But once that was kind of broken up through cell phones and wireless systems, there was competition, and now you actually have some choice in who you will use for your telecommunications needs. Likewise, it seems like transportation to some degree, maybe not as much, but to some degree, will be helped with technology, and maybe it would be through like a pod system where you would have a raised kind of independent roadway that would be controlled electronically. You'd get in your little pod and you kind of program and go wherever you want. But that's the thing. But what we talked about is that a lot of cities want to spend the money instead on light rail. Phoenix recently got a couple $2 billion from the federal government to implement a light rail system that really just moves people from one part of town to downtown where the stadiums are for the basketball game or the baseball game, and then down to the college campus. And so it seems like a total waste of money. The government dedicated the money to do one thing where an independent entrepreneur would come in and would do something totally different with that, use technology in a better way.
What? The government wastes money? How dare you? This is ridiculous. Don't be saying bad things about my governing boy.
I know. I'm going to get in trouble with that.
Right. No, of course I'm just kidding. No,
you're welcome to leave.
No, you're quite right that the government wastes money, and but what we have is the Sovietization of our transportation system. I mean, what we really have when we have government roads is socialist roads, and why should we expect socialist roads to work well? What we need is capitalist roads and free enterprise roads.
Well, would you be okay with taking a question from a caller?
Of course.
Okay. I'd like to welcome Corky and Tempe on the show. Corky, welcome to the Libertarian Solution.
Hello, Dr. Block. I remember you for many years in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Oh, yes.
Corky Day is my name.
Great.
Of the Green Party. And what I usually do, I call in and try to find common ground between the Libertarians and the Green Party, even though we're very different on many things.
Yes.
So what I found in common is that we both hate the highway massacres, and both of our parties don't like government subsidies toward the car culture.
Yes.
Right.
So that's what we have in common. So the solution, of course, in the Green Party, our solution would be to go to railroads, passenger railroads again. And I could even live with them being in private hands still, because the private or any railways are safer, cheaper, and more fuel efficient, which meets the objectives of the Green Party, and some of yours also, I think. So instead of talking about privatizing the highways and the roads, I think we should put much more emphasis on reviving the passenger railways as they have in Europe, China, and India. And this is why those three countries are in the long run going to be ahead of us if we stick with our car culture, which is killing us and wasting fuel and wasting money.
Well, that's an interesting...
Well,
go ahead.
Do you want me to answer that one?
Go for it.
Yes. Libertarians are not the type to dictate to people as Green Party people are. When it comes to ice cream, whether it's vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, banana, peach, whatever, we Libertarians say, you pays your money and you takes your choice, and we're not pushing vanilla versus strawberry ice cream or vice versa. And the same goes when it comes to fuels. Should it be nuclear, coal, oil, whatever, wind, water power? We don't push anything. We say people should make their own choices. And also similarly with should it be roads or highways or trolley cars or what have you. Now, I will say several things. One, in Europe, they've got, and in Japan, they've got railroads that'll go 200 miles an hour. Ours are lucky if they go 20 miles an hour. So there's plenty of room for railroads. What really ruined railroads in this country, though, is unions, which I fear the Green Party people favor. But if we had no unions, then a lot of those big fat trucks, the 18-wheelers, I predict would be using railroads because, those railroads can take 500 boxcars with, 2 or 3 people. Whereas when you get 500 boxcars on the highways, you need 500 drivers. So I don't think that anyone should put their finger on the scales of justice and push us railroads or highways. I think what we ought to have is free competition and let, to the victor goes the spoils, or to let competition decide this. Let the people decide instead of having dictators like from the Green Party, with all due respect, pushing one mode of transportation versus the other. We weren't really discussing all transportation. We were just discussing roads, but if you bring in railroads, there's nothing wrong with private railroads and private highways, and let people take their choice. Let not Phoenix or anyone else tax zillions of dollars away from people and force them onto these light rail or trolleys or whatever they want to do, buses. But just let the free enterprise system work. Adam Smith had this great book, The Wealth of Nations, and he said that those countries that are rich and prosperous are the ones that rely to a greater degree on private property and profits and losses and free enterprise. And I don't see the case for socialism of the sort that you're espousing, namely we should push light rail, because whenever socialism has been tried, first of all, it's immoral, and whenever it's been tried, it's come to a dismal failure.
Well, Corky, thank you as always so much for the call. Dr. Block, we actually, Jim, did you have one more?
I have one more question, but this is something that I want to invite Dr. Block back on at some point, because he wrote a very interesting article about the proper relationship between an unjust government and the inhabitant of a country. And to me, that is such an interesting topic because it's so current at this point, to me, in my opinion. And I just wanted to mention, if Dr. Block's willing at some point in the future to come back and talk about that. I mean, roads are such an extensive subject. We could spend hours talking about that, but that's another very interesting subject, too.
Well, thanks for having me now, and I'd be delighted to come on again on any subject, and certainly that subject.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're glad to have you on the Libertarian Solution program this evening.
Have a good night.
You too.